gave me an extended course of antibiotics, which changed the course of my life forever. I had eye floaters to the point I couldn't see. I looked like I was 6 months pregnant. I changed, and I could never go back to the person that I was before. Reading stories of people that had suffered with the same thing for 8 years, 10 years, 15 years, and many times for the months that followed, I thought that I couldn't live this way for the rest of my life.
Why did you move out?
I obsessed over one sole thing, which was recovery. I spent 6 months unpacking the puzzle, which was my current health situation, and developing a solution. I knew that I had a karma to fulfill, helping other people with the problem that I had. You gain experience and knowledge and growth by trying something and then falling flat on your face, and then you either decide that you want to learn from that and grow and evolve, or you stay flat on the ground and you never try again. You know, when I was thinking about my story, it was a series of failures and then successes. And on every occasion, there were moments where, whether it was other people's opinions or incredible amounts of resistance, told me to stop. And I chose not to. And doing that enough times led me to where I am today. In my first take of this video, I talked about my formative years rowing, and that being where I developed discipline and obsession. But really, that was arguably the toughest years of my life, because I wanted to be the best so badly that it hurt so much to fall flat on my face. I was doing everything right, wearing compression dumbbells around the house, elevating my legs to a specific angle for recovery. I had a pig trough in my garden that I was doing ice baths in. The pursuit of being perfect and chasing those marginal gains sucked the love and the joy out of the process, and that stress and that pressure decayed me from the inside out. And this was to the point that when doctors blood tested me, they thought I had bone marrow disease or leukemia. You never forget your mom's face when a doctor says they're going to test your son for leukemia and you've got to wait 5 days for the results. And this is for someone who's seemingly healthy, doing everything right. No matter how many tests they ran, there was nothing physiologically wrong with me. And it was only once I took time off and came back into rowing, into my passion at the time, with no expectations, and just enjoying the process, that my performance skyrocketed. And this is where I really learned that it's not necessarily a case of the more you put in, the more you get out. And when you're a teenage kid, you don't have the experience to understand this. I often think about, if I could go back in time, I would have done it so good, you know, with everything that I know now. I was stuffing my face, eating like 6,000 calories a day. My mum, we were having work done on our house, and so our kitchen was in a caravan for like 4 months. And I would sit down, skinny kid, and she'd serve up a tray of dauphinoise potatoes, 2 steaks, and a whole pack of broccoli. She's probably spent half her earnings on feeding me. Then somehow a few years later, I was writing a book on fasting, eating like nothing till 4 p.m, which really was a time where I felt like I discovered fire. I went from, as I said, stuffing my face as an athletic kid that struggled to gain weight, to finding myself in this area of almost biohacking. I didn't know it at the time. I was so fascinated by that I started writing all of my notes and birthed the idea of a book. I was like an 18, 19-year-old kid who writes a book. Trust me, plenty of people said that. Why the fuck are you writing a book? But I was so interested, and I was in such killer shape. And it changed my way of being to such an extent that I'm an introvert, but when I get obsessed and passionate about something, I'm relentless with trying to understand everything about it. And that first pursuit was with fasting. If only I discovered this when I was in school, because I was so beat up that my grades I flunked all of my exams because rowing was my pursuit. And that meant that I couldn't get into any universities. I went to a university just to row, and then my health was so dire that I had to quit. I left the uni the day before I would have got charged 9 grand in tuition. So I was a uni dropout. Didn't know what I was doing. And all of a sudden I discovered this idea of, that's a lie. All of a sudden I started boozing. I started boozing. I did a gap year, I did a ski season. I escaped, went to the mountains where no one knew me. Part of the reason why I'm so healthy now is because I pushed the boundaries of being unhealthy so hard. I went down the abusing my body, no sleep, boozing, partying. I got it all out of my system. But there was a point in which I could have, as an extremist, as someone with an addictive personality, I could have channeled that addiction into unhealthy means. But instead I decided to turn that obsession towards studying and towards health.
How did you do that?
I retook all of my exams and I applied for a foundation year for an engineering degree in Manchester. And they specifically took on special cases where something had happened to the kid that stopped them from getting the grades. And so I wrote them my big sob story about how all of my energy was into rowing and no one would ever work as hard as I did. I got onto that foundation year, and at the end of the year, I got my grades back and I'd failed. And if you fail, you're kicked off the course, you can't retake. I had to look through my results and there was a 0% grade. Obviously, I thought my life was over at that point. And there was a 0% grade, and for a coursework that I knew I took. And so I called them up, and I forgot to put my name on the paper. And once they graded it and gave it to me, I made it through. But from that point forward until now, I made a commitment to work harder than anyone else would, because I knew the price and the consequences of just slacking. People think that because I'm a health coach that I must have studied nutrition or medicine. Part of me wishes I did, part of me is very glad I didn't, because engineering taught me a level of problem solving that has allowed me to crack health problems in a far superior way, because you can self-study and learn, especially if you specialize into a very narrow topic of health. You can learn far more through self-study or specialized courses or programs than someone who's trying to learn every facet of health or nutrition, which first got tested when I went through my own health issues. I went solo traveling in Turkey, and I was big on the whole farm to table, eating minimally processed foods, much like I do now in raw milk. I was eating yogurt that was just like unpasteurized, literally straight from the farm, probably came from some super unsanitized, regulated farm. I was eating like that for my whole trip, and then I started developing digestive issues. And then one day, it was the day before I was supposed to fly home, I was completely knocked for six, like shivering, shaking, cold, even though it was 35 degrees Celsius for the Americans outside. And I was bedbound and I was supposed to fly, and I hadn't packed. And it hit me like a ton of bricks, and then all of a sudden I had severe stomach cramps. And then almost in a blink of an eye, I just stopped, and I was fine again. I pulled my stuff together and I got on a flight and I left. And then I started just developing more and more digestive issues, which was very confusing for me as someone who could eat 6,000 calories a day without, feeding anything in my stomach. The idea of bloating was a foreign concept. I hardly knew or understood that the gut or the digestive system was even a thing. And all of a sudden I started to develop issues. And so I went to the doctor, with no pre-existing knowledge, and they gave me an extended course of antibiotics, which changed the course of my life forever. Within days, I was knocked for 6. I had eye floaters to the point I couldn't see. I looked like I was 6 months pregnant. If someone walked in the door, my ears would flinch like a lion walked in the door. And I couldn't eat any foods. It was almost as if through just taking antibiotics, I changed, and I could never go back to the person that I was before. And that spiraled very quickly into a lot of downstream health issues that became crippling. My I had anxiety, depressive behaviors that were out of my immediate control. Knowing meditation was going to get me out of it, because it was a physiological issue in my body causing a psychological issue in my brain. And I remember Googling this, people, like, if anyone had had the same issues, and reading stories of people that had suffered with the same thing for 8 years, 10 years, 15 years, lived their whole life with it and never got over it. It's a scary feeling, staring down the barrel of, living, basically suffering for the rest of your life. And I'll never forget going back to the doctors, the same doctors that gave me the prescription. And the guy who gave it to me wouldn't see me. He passed me on to a specialist who basically said that this wasn't the antibiotics. There's nothing we can do. Here's a repeat prescription of laxatives for life to help you go to the bathroom. Obviously, I was in awe and amazement. Like, there must be more to it than this. But I got back in my car and I burst into tears. And that was arguably the only point in my life that life didn't feel like leading. And many times for the months that followed, I thought that I couldn't live this way for the rest of my life. Couldn't leave the house. Socially isolated myself for a good 6 months. Couldn't use the bathroom for over a week. Had to go to a clinic that shoved a pipe up my ass basically and forcibly made me go to the bathroom. You sit there and you wish that you never took the antibiotics. And that one small decision you wish you hadn't made, and you're filled with regret. And I spoke to her. She's basically a spiritual teacher. If you're watching this, keep an open mind. I don't judge you, don't judge me. But she said that this is going to be the best thing that ever happens to you. And in that moment, I wanted to tell her to fuck off, basically. Well, in my head, but more so that I couldn't fathom how this would be the best thing that ever happened to me.
Why did you move out?
Obsession. I obsessed over one sole thing, which was recovery. And I spent 6 months unpacking the puzzle, which was my current health situation, and developing a solution. The crazy thing is that I've spent nearly 3 years of my life in isolation, because I was already socially isolating because of my health, and then the world locked down and I was in forced isolation. I was happy when those lockdowns happened because I was given an excuse to do what I was already doing, and there was no pressure on me, and I could just focus on my recovery and healing. And in that time, this is where, just as a means of passing time, I set up a website. It was actually my mum's partner, or my now stepdad, Roger, who bought me the web domain bensmithlive.com. And I hated it. But with a name like Ben Smith, there's not really many options with your name in it. So I went on Instagram and found that the username bensmithlive was available, and I changed my whole brand around this website that my stepdad bought for me. So I built a website on Wix and started my email newsletter through email, and used the time that I was isolated to finish my degree and to build a personal brand and to start building towards a business. I finished my book, which I published, even though people said I was fucking a weirdo for writing a book at the age that I did, but it became an Amazon bestseller, and then all of a sudden it was like, wow, cool, you wrote a book. And this is where, oh God, I cringe to watch. But Instagram launched the feature IGTV, which is basically what now Reels is. And I remember I called it, because I made a post or published a post that vertical video was going to be the future of video, because I thought it was so cool. And I started making vlogs in that vertical format of my recovery, and it was called My Journey Back to Fitness. I did a reel about recovering, the final stage of my recovery, getting back to fitness and getting back to just living and leading my life. And I was pale and it was cringe. I was living in a house in Manchester with 10 other guys, and I hired someone to do a photo shoot for my website, and we were having a pre-drinks at our house with all of our friends, a bunch of girls. And I was in the kitchen scrubbing the floors, scrubbing the kitchen down, because I had a shoot the next day for my website. And I had girls that I knew and friends like walking around me whilst I was cleaning our kitchen. And that was for my website, bensmithlive.com. And this is where opinions started to get very, very heavy. And this is where it's, you know, for people that want to build a personal brand or want to do something special, you've got to understand that people are gonna have something to say regardless. And that is an inevitable and something that you have to push through if you want the rewards and what comes with it. The same people who were taking the piss out of me for posting content were then asking for help with their health issues 4 years later. It took probably 5 years of consistent effort and blocking out the noise until I broke through. That started with my book, and then I say that when I first launched my book, I launched a Q&A on my stories and no one asked any questions. I had like 10,000 followers at this time. No one asked any questions, so I had to set up another Instagram account and ask myself questions so that I could answer them in my Q&A when I launched my book. So, you know, it's like in the beginning, no one's going to give a shit, and they're going to have everything to say. And these are the times and the moments where you have to push and keep pushing until you break through. And when my book launched, I chased people down for reviews, and then it finally became an Amazon bestseller. And this is where things really took off. I graduated and I went and did a summer season in Ibiza, which I promise can be a really healthy place. And I had just been a recluse for 3 years. In the airport, just being around people, I was physically shaking because it was hyper-stimulating. Never mind arriving and there being a beach full of people. For 6 months, I made it my mantra to just seek discomfort. And I rubbed shoulders with a lot of big players in the health and fitness industry. Even though I took complete time off, that was a 6-month period where I made arguably the most progress in my life. It's this idea of speed versus velocity. It's not just about working hard, but it's also about the direction, and in some cases the connections. And it can only take one conversation to drastically change either the course of your life. And for me, I was introduced to a software company that wanted to build a product with me around this gut health journey in Ibiza, of all places. And I knew that I had a karma to fulfill helping other people with the problem that I had. So I left Ibiza with my tail between my legs, and I locked myself in for nearly 2 months to build my first business, Live. And on the day of launch, I had 42p in my, pounds, 42p in my bank account. And I managed to collect 5,000 emails for people interested in the product. What happened at the launch would shock you.